The Millionaire CEO was heading to the office, until he saw a little girl crying beside a broken bike, and something in her eyes stopped him cold. Noah Bennett's morning had begun like every other for the past 10 years, an early rise, black coffee in a stainless steel mug, and the quiet hum of his luxury car moving steadily through the city streets. He always walked the last block to the office, enjoying the illusion of still being part of the world outside his empire. With his crisp navy suit, neatly styled dark curls, and piercing blue eyes, he looked every bit the image of success. He had no patience for delays, detours, or distractions. His days were planned to the minute. The morning sun was already warming the pavement, and the scent of summer hung heavy in the air as he turned the corner, focused on the call he was about to join. That's when he saw her. At first, it was the flash of motion on the sidewalk ahead that caught his eye, something small and shaky, crouched beside a battered pink bicycle. Then he heard the muffled sound of crying. A little girl, no older than 6, sat hunched beside the bike, her face hidden behind large round glasses, her hands gripping the twisted handlebars. Her long, dark curls were tangled from sweat and tears, and her blue eyes, so startlingly familiar, were filled with frustration and heartbreak. Noah slowed to a stop, not because he planned to help, but because he couldn't look away. There was something about her face, the shape of her eyes, the way her expression crumpled as she wiped her tears on her sleeve, that tugged at something deep in his memory. He hesitated, glancing at his watch, then at the girl. His instincts told him to keep walking. This wasn't his business. He didn't stop for street drama or strangers in distress. But something about this child, the way she muttered to herself as she tried to fix the chain, the quiet determination behind her tears, held him in place. He crouched down a few feet away, keeping his voice low. "Hey," he said. "Are you okay?" The girl jumped slightly and looked up, clearly startled. She blinked behind her glasses, then sniffled. "I'm fine," she said quickly, though her voice betrayed her. "My bike broke. I can fix it." Noah studied the bike. The chain was off, the front wheel bent, and one pedal was hanging by a thread. It was beyond a simple fix. "Looks like it needs a little more than a quick fix," he said gently. "Is your mom nearby?" The girl shook her head. "She's at work. I'm supposed to stay close to home. But I wanted to ride to the park. I didn't mean to go far." Her lip trembled, and she added softly, "She doesn't have money to get it fixed. So I thought maybe I could fix it myself." Noah felt a strange pressure in his chest, unfamiliar and tight. "Where's your dad?" he asked, not expecting the answer to matter. But her response stopped him cold. "I don't have one," she said simply. "Or maybe I do. I've never met him." He swallowed hard. "What's your name?" She hesitated. "Sophie. Sophie Carter." The name hit him like a punch. Abby Carter. That name he hadn't thought about in years. A quiet intern he'd briefly dated before their lives drifted apart. He had never followed up, never asked questions, never thought to wonder what had come after. Now, here was Sophie. With blue eyes that looked like his. And a last name he couldn't ignore. Noah stood slowly, his mind racing. For the first time in years, he forgot about the call waiting on his phone, the deal he was supposed to close, and the perfectly crafted life that had seemed so complete, until this exact moment. Noah didn't remember making the decision to stay, but somehow he found himself sitting on the edge of the curb beside the little girl, watching her try once more to force the twisted pedal into place with her small, scraped fingers. She was determined, more than most adults he knew, and there was something both admirable and heartbreaking in the way she refused to give up even though it was clear she didn't have the tools, strength, or experience to fix it. He gently reached out and stopped her hand. "Hey," he said more softly this time, "why don't we take a break for a second? You've been working hard." Sophie looked at him with cautious eyes, as though unsure whether she should trust a stranger in a suit. But then her shoulders sagged a little and she let out a quiet breath. sitting back on the sidewalk, her legs crossed under her. "I just wanted to surprise Mom," she said finally. "I know she's tired, and if I got the bike working again, she wouldn't have to walk me everywhere." Noah was quiet, processing the weight behind such a simple statement. 6 years old, and already thinking about how to take pressure off her mother. He wondered what else she had been forced to carry without ever saying it out loud. He glanced down at the broken bike, then back at her. "Would it be okay if I helped?" he asked. "We could take it somewhere to get it fixed. My car's not far." She hesitated, looking at him like she was trying to see into his heart. Then she nodded. He led her carefully to his car parked just around the corner, and when he opened the back door and gently placed the broken bike inside, he noticed how she kept her hands on the door frame, as if ready to flee at any moment. He respected that. He didn't push her to talk, didn't ask questions about her mother, or pry into her life further. He just fastened her seatbelt and asked if she wanted a donut. Her nod was small, but hopeful. They stopped at a local cafe a few blocks away. He bought her a warm chocolate donut and an apple juice, and sat across from her at a quiet corner table while she cautiously took a bite. Noah didn't eat. He watched her instead, watching how she held the straw with both hands, how her gaze wandered to the window and then always came back to him, as if trying to decide whether this moment was real or temporary. After a few minutes, he finally asked the question that had been hovering between them since she said her full name. "Sophie," he said gently, "your mom's name is Abby, right?" She looked up, surprised, then nodded. "Yeah. Abby Carter. Do you know her?" He tried not to let emotion crack his voice. "I think I did. A while ago. Before you were born." She looked at him more carefully now, narrowing her eyes like a little detective. "You work in an office?" she asked. "A big one?" He smiled faintly. "Yeah, I do. She told me, my dad worked in an office. I asked once. She didn't say much, just that he was busy and didn't know about me. But she said he wasn't mean. Just gone." Noah sat back in his chair, stunned by the simplicity of that explanation. Abby hadn't poisoned Sophie's mind with resentment. She had left the door open, even if only slightly. "And, do you ever think about him?" he asked cautiously. Sophie shrugged. "Sometimes. But I don't miss him, because I never had him. I just think maybe, if he did know, he might have come." That sentence landed like a stone in Noah's chest. He had been that man. The one who didn't know. Or maybe the one who hadn't wanted to. He couldn't decide which was worse. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with corporate pressure or strategy. "Sophie," he said, slowly, "what if I told you I might be him?" She blinked, lips parting, but said nothing at first. Then she tilted her head, squinting at his face like she was comparing it to something in her memory. "You have the same eyes as me," she said quietly. "And the same nose." Noah let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The truth wasn't fully spoken yet, but it hung between them, warm and impossible to ignore. Sophie didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just looked at him, calm and direct, and asked, "Are you going to disappear again?" It was the hardest question anyone had ever asked him. And without hesitation, he gave her the only answer that mattered. "No," he said. "Not this time." The following morning, Noah couldn't sit still. He had spent most of the night replaying every moment with Sophie in his mind, the broken bike, her quiet strength, the way she had looked at him when she asked if he was going to disappear. He hadn't expected to feel so much, so fast, but something in her eyes had struck a chord that wouldn't stop ringing. It wasn't just guilt. It was something deeper, more primal. The realization that he had missed out on 6 years of her life, and that she had gone through all of it without him. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't planned for it, but now that she existed in his world, nothing else mattered the same way. Before the sun had fully risen, He was on his laptop, calling in favors and digging through old company files. It didn't take long to confirm that Abby Carter had worked in his firm during the time he remembered. She had left shortly after the end of their short relationship, and no one had heard from her since. She hadn't filed any complaints, hadn't asked for anything, not money, not support, not even a conversation. She had simply disappeared. That, more than anything, hit Noah the hardest. She hadn't made a scene or demanded accountability. She had just quietly raised a daughter on her own. And now, fate, or maybe something else, had placed Sophie directly in his path. He had no idea what Abby would say when she saw him. He didn't even know if she'd want him involved. But that didn't matter. She deserved to know what had happened. And Sophie deserved the truth, from both of them. He drove across the city to the hospital where Sophie had said Abby worked. It was still early, the sky just beginning to brighten with streaks of gold and gray. He walked into the hospital with the same focused energy he usually brought into boardrooms, but this time it was fueled by nerves, not confidence. He asked the woman at the front desk if Abby Carter was working that day. The receptionist checked a schedule, nodded, and pointed toward the third floor. His hands were cold as he stepped into the elevator. When he reached the hallway, he paused before stepping forward. Through the small glass panel in one of the doors, he saw her. Abby. She was wearing scrubs, her hair tied back in a braid, her posture tired but upright as she reviewed a chart at the nurse's station. She hadn't changed much. The same warm skin tone, the same intelligent expression in her eyes, even if they were more worn now. There was strength in her presence, strength he hadn't appreciated back then. He took a breath and stepped forward. She turned just as he approached, and for a moment she didn't recognize him. Then her face changed, first confusion, then recognition, and then something harder to name. She straightened, setting the chart aside. Her voice was careful, quiet. Noah. He nodded. Hi, Abby. There was a long pause. He could feel the weight of it between them, thick with unspoken questions. She looked at him, arms crossed lightly, not hostile but wary. What are you doing here? I met Sophie, he said simply. Yesterday. She was trying to fix her bike. I stopped to help her. She told me your name, and I figured it out. Abby's expression flickered. She didn't answer right away. He could see her mind working, calculating, protecting, processing. Finally, she sighed. She wasn't supposed to meet you like that. I know, he said. I didn't plan it. But now that I know, I couldn't walk away. Abby's eyes filled with something unreadable. I never asked for anything, Noah. I didn't want to ruin your life or throw you into something you didn't choose. I raised her on my own because I thought that was best. I thought you'd moved on. I had, he admitted. Or I thought I had. But seeing her face, hearing her speak, it changed everything. I'm not here to take anything away. I just want to understand. And if you'll let me, I want to try to be part of her life. Abby looked down at her hands for a long moment. Then she nodded, slowly. She's not some project you can drop when things get hard. She's a person. A brilliant, kind, funny little person. And if you want to be in her life, it's not about promises to me. It's about showing up for her. I know, he said. And I'm not going anywhere this time. They stood in silence again, not quite reconciled, but no longer on opposite sides. Something had shifted, an opening, small but real. I get off at 5, she said finally. If you're serious, come by the apartment tonight. You can have dinner with us. And just like that, a door reopened. One he had once closed without even realizing it. When Noah showed up at Abby's apartment that evening, he wasn't sure what to expect. He had spent the entire afternoon in a haze of nervous energy, replaying every word they had exchanged at the hospital, questioning whether it had gone well or whether she had simply been too tired to say no. He stood in the dim hallway of her modest apartment building holding a paper bag with dinner from a local place he'd remembered she liked, unsure if it was a gesture too small, too late, or somehow both. The sound of children's laughter echoed faintly behind the door before he knocked. Sophie answered, her eyes lighting up in surprise when she saw him. "You came," she said, like she'd only half believed he would. Noah smiled and nodded, stepping inside when she stepped back. The apartment was warm and worn in, filled with the gentle clutter of a life built around love and limitation. Crayon drawings were taped to the fridge, a stack of library books sat by the couch, and the faint scent of something clean but old, like lavender and dust, lingered in the air. It was far from the sterile perfection of his penthouse, but it already felt more alive. Abby emerged from the small kitchen wiping her hands on a towel. She didn't smile, but she didn't look surprised either. "She told me you brought her donuts," she said as she walked past him to set the table. "You might have just become her favorite person." "I brought dinner," Noah offered, lifting the bag as if it were proof of good intentions. "Nothing fancy. Just what I remembered you liked." That made her pause for a second. "You remembered," she said, quiet, almost to herself. Then she nodded. "Okay. Thank you." They sat down at the small table, the three of them close together in the tight space. Sophie chattered as she ate, telling stories about school and how she'd almost won a race at recess. Noah listened, completely absorbed. It was the first time he had seen her like this, in her world, surrounded by the things and people that made her feel safe. He caught the way Abby's eyes softened when Sophie giggled, the way she instinctively reached to brush crumbs from her daughter's chin. Watching them together, he felt like a visitor to a place he should have always known. After dinner, Sophie pulled out her drawing pad and asked if Noah wanted to help her finish a picture she'd started earlier. He knelt beside her at the coffee table and did his best to sketch a clumsy version of their broken bike adventure. She laughed at how bad his wheels looked, and he pretended to be offended. Abby sat quietly on the couch, observing, her guard slowly lowering as she watched them bond. Once Sophie had gone to bed, after insisting Noah tuck her in too, Abby poured 2 cups of tea and joined him at the table again. The room was quieter now, and the weight of what still needed to be said hung between them. She looked at him seriously, her voice low. "Why now?" she asked. "After all this time, why show up now?" Noah didn't flinch. He had asked himself that question repeatedly since meeting Sophie. "Because I didn't know. And once I did, I couldn't ignore it. I've spent my whole life building things that don't matter the way she does. I don't expect you to trust me yet. But I'm here because I want to be her father. Not just by name. Really be there." Abby watched him closely. "And if she gets attached and you change your mind?" "I won't," he said. "I know I missed her first steps and her first words. But I won't miss anything else if you let me stay." She stared at him for a long time before nodding, slowly. "We'll take it one step at a time." That night, as he left the apartment, Noah stood in the hallway for a moment before heading down the stairs. For the first time in years, he felt like something had begun, not a deal, not a project, but a life. One that was no longer his alone. Noah had never known what it meant to be needed outside of the boardroom. In his professional life, every request came with a purpose, a number, or a bottom line. But with Sophie, everything was different. Her needs were never spoken in full sentences or requests typed in email threads, they came in glances, in the way she looked at him when she wasn't sure if he would show up again, in the way her little hand sometimes reached for his without a word. He had told Abby he would stay, and now he was doing exactly that. Every morning before work, he stopped by to walk Sophie to school. He had no idea how to braid hair or pack a school lunch, but he was learning. She showed him how to fold napkins into triangles and insisted he include a note every day, even if it was just a smiley face or the words, "Good luck," scribbled in his messy handwriting. She kept every one. Abby remained cautious, but there was a new softness between them. She still worked long shifts, and there were nights Noah came by just to help with dinner or cleaning or to keep Sophie company while Abby slept on the couch for a rare afternoon nap. He didn't try to take over, he just fit himself into the spaces they allowed him. The three of them had dinner together more often now, sometimes in his apartment, which he had begun childproofing bit by bit, amazed at how different it felt with crayon drawings taped to the fridge and a toy box near the couch. Sophie took to his space quickly, rearranging the furniture in tiny ways, placing her stuffed bear on his bed, lining her shoes next to his at the door, claiming little parts of his life like she belonged there. And the truth was, she did. One weekend, he picked her up early and surprised her with a trip to the park. She raced ahead of him with her new bicycle, not the broken one from the first day, but a shiny, sky blue bike he had helped her pick out. She still wore her glasses, now with a new pink frame that matched her helmet. As she zoomed along the path, Noah couldn't stop watching her, her freedom, her confidence, her laughter echoing through the trees. She didn't seem like a child who had grown up missing something. But he knew better. She had simply never let herself expect more. Later that afternoon, as they sat on the grass and shared a melting popsicle, Sophie looked up at him and asked, "Were you scared to be a dad?" The question caught him off guard. He didn't want to lie. "Yes," he said. "Very. I was scared I'd mess it up. That I wouldn't be good enough." She nodded, thoughtful. "I think you're good at it now," she said, and took another bite of popsicle. He laughed, feeling something inside him quietly break and rebuild all at once. He reached out and ruffled her curls, grateful she couldn't see how wet his eyes had suddenly become. That evening, when they returned to Abby's apartment, Sophie ran inside first, calling out about everything they had seen, the ducks at the lake, the ice cream stand, the way Noah almost fell trying to race her uphill. Abby smiled as she listened, watching them both. After Sophie went to bed, Noah lingered in the kitchen, helping wash dishes in silence until Abby finally spoke. "She's changed," she said. "She's happier. Braver." He looked at her, uncertain whether to respond. "It's not just you," she added, "but you're part of it." He didn't know how to reply, so instead he just nodded and dried the last plate. Before leaving, he paused at Sophie's bedroom door. She was already asleep, her new bear tucked under one arm, the note he had written that day pinned to her wall. He stood there for a moment, the quiet weight of fatherhood settling deeper into his bones. He had once believed that his life would always be defined by achievement, by status, by how many people depended on his decisions. But now he understood, what mattered most was this one small person, dreaming peacefully under a quilt her mother had stitched together piece by piece. And outside that room, a new kind of life was waiting for him. One he never thought he'd deserve, but one he now couldn't imagine losing. Noah hadn't realized just how much his life had changed until he found himself sitting in a small elementary school auditorium on a rainy Thursday evening, surrounded by folding chairs, handmade posters, and the hum of excited children waiting to perform in their end-of-year play. He was no longer glancing constantly at his phone or checking his watch. He was focused entirely on the stage, waiting to see Sophie appear in her little paper crown, dressed as a bike fairy in a story she had helped write. When her name was announced, he clapped louder than anyone, his heart swelling as she stepped onto the stage, her dark curls bouncing with every movement, her bright blue eyes scanning the crowd until they found him. The second she saw him, her entire face lit up. That one look erased any lingering doubt about his place in her life. She knew he was there. She expected him now. And he wouldn't fail her. After the play, they took photos with Abby, who had been able to trade shifts just in time to attend. She stood beside them, smiling shyly as Sophie demanded a picture with both of my parents. It was the first time Sophie had said those words aloud in front of them, and they both paused at the sound of it. Abby didn't correct her. Noah didn't flinch. Instead, they exchanged a glance, quiet, cautious, but not uncertain. They were building something. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't fast, but it was real. Back at Noah's apartment, Sophie changed into her pajamas and danced around the kitchen while he heated up her favorite soup. Abby watched from the hallway, leaning against the doorframe with her arms crossed. Her eyes were tired, but there was a softness in her expression Noah hadn't seen before. When Sophie finally went to bed, hugging him tightly before disappearing into her room, Abby stayed behind in the living room. She sat down slowly, her hands folded in her lap, and looked at Noah seriously. "She's happier than I've ever seen her," she said. "She trusts you." Noah sat across from her, his voice low. "I'll never take that for granted." "I mean that." Abby nodded, staring at the floor. "When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified. I thought about telling you. So many times. But I was afraid you'd be angry. Or worse, you pretend to care, but then disappear anyway. So I didn't give you the chance." "I would have shown up," Noah said. "I know it sounds empty now, after everything. But I wish you had told me." "I don't regret raising her alone," Abby replied. "But I regret that she had to wait this long to know you. She deserved more." He couldn't argue. She was right. He had missed her first words, her first steps, her scraped knees, her birthday candles. But he was here now. And he would be here for everything else. The conversation shifted as the night deepened. They spoke honestly, without blame. They shared stories, memories of the short time they'd known each other before things fell apart. There was a tenderness between them now, not romantic yet, but open. They were no longer strangers connected by a child. They were partners in her life. Maybe more than that. Maybe not yet. As Abby stood to leave, Noah walked her to the door. She paused with her hand on the knob and looked up at him. "You're doing better than I thought you would," she said with a small smile. "She's lucky." "I think I'm the lucky one," he replied. After she left, he walked back to Sophie's room and peeked inside. She was asleep, her arm curled around her bear, the paper crown from the play resting on the nightstand beside her. He leaned against the doorframe and just watched her for a while, letting the silence settle into something peaceful. Noah had lived in penthouses, traveled on private jets, and signed deals that changed the course of industries. But nothing had ever grounded him like this small apartment with finger-painted drawings on the fridge and a little girl who called him "Daddy" without hesitation. And somewhere deep in his chest, a part of him finally started to believe that maybe he hadn't failed. Maybe he had just arrived late, to the only meeting that ever really mattered. The morning started like any other, with Noah packing Sophie's lunch while she drew flowers on sticky notes and Abby sipped her coffee with half-closed eyes at the kitchen table. The light poured in softly through the windows, and there was a peaceful rhythm to everything, a gentle choreography that had slowly formed between them over the last few weeks. But peace, Noah had learned, was fragile. Halfway through the morning, just as he dropped Sophie off at school and was turning back toward the parking lot, his phone buzzed with a number he didn't recognize. Something in him knew before he answered that the day would not go as planned. The voice on the other end belonged to a nurse from the hospital where Abby worked. There had been an incident, a minor fall, they said, but she had blacked out for a moment and had been taken to the ER as a precaution. Noah felt the blood drain from his face. He was already back in the car before the call had ended, heart pounding, hands shaking slightly on the wheel. Memories flashed through his mind, how hard Abby worked, how little sleep she got, how many times she brushed off exhaustion like it was normal. He hadn't been there for her when she needed him most in the past, and the thought of failing her again filled him with a fear that knotted in his gut. At the hospital, he found her in a small exam room, pale but conscious, with a bruise already forming on her temple. She tried to sit up when he entered, but he rushed to her side and gently urged her back against the pillows. "It's nothing," she insisted, her voice hoarse. "I slipped on a wet floor. I just need to rest." But the doctors weren't so quick to dismiss it. They wanted to run tests, scans, blood work, the usual protocol, but Abby looked resistant, tense. Noah sat beside her and took her hand, not pressing, not demanding, but simply showing he was there. "Let them check everything," he said quietly. "Just in case." For Sophie. That changed her mind. She nodded, closed her eyes, and let them work. Hours passed, long and slow. Noah called the school to arrange for Sophie to stay with a teacher until he could get there. Then he waited. He didn't scroll through emails or take calls. For the first time, his business world felt like static noise he could finally tune out. All that mattered was behind that curtain, lying on a hospital bed, and the little girl who would be terrified if something truly happened to her mother. When the doctor returned with test results, his expression was calm, not urgent. Abby had low blood pressure and dehydration, likely brought on by overwork. It wasn't life-threatening, but it was a warning. Her body had been trying to keep going, and it had finally pushed back. Noah took Abby home that afternoon. She protested at first, insisting she could manage on her own, but he didn't leave room for argument. Sophie burst into tears when she saw her mom with a bandage on her head, clinging to her tightly. Noah explained everything gently, crouching down and letting Sophie cry into his shirt while Abby rested on the couch. That night, he cooked dinner, bathed Sophie, and even did a load of laundry in Abby's old washing machine that thumped louder than it spun. He stayed late, cleaning up quietly while Abby dozed under a blanket. Before he left, he stood at the doorway to her room. She was awake, watching him with tired eyes. "You didn't have to stay," she murmured. "I could have handled it." "No," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You shouldn't have to handle everything alone anymore." She didn't answer right away. Then she nodded, her eyes brimming with a different kind of exhaustion. One that had less to do with her body and more with years of doing it all herself. He walked over, gently kissed her forehead, and said, "Get some rest. I'll pick up Sophie from school tomorrow." As he let himself out, he realized that today had shaken him more than he cared to admit. Abby's fall had forced him to confront a truth he hadn't yet fully understood. This wasn't just about being present for Sophie. It was about being there for Abby too. She was more than the girl from his past. She was the woman who had carried the weight of their child, of her own life, of everything they should have shared. And now, he wanted to carry part of that weight. He drove home through quiet streets, the sky heavy with stars, and something settled deep inside him. A certainty. He loved them. Both of them. Not out of obligation or guilt or timing. But because, for the first time, he understood what it meant to belong somewhere, and to someone. Spring crept in gently, with soft breezes and longer days that made the world feel lighter. The weeks following Abby's fall had changed the rhythm of their lives in small but permanent ways. Noah began spending more nights at their apartment, not as a visitor but as someone who had found a place where he truly belonged. Sophie no longer asked if he was coming back each time he left, she knew he would. And Abby, slowly and cautiously, began to let down the guard she had carried for 6 years. The trust between them had grown out of shared effort, not promises. Every packed lunch, every ride to school, every load of laundry folded beside her in the evening chipped away at the distance that had once felt unbridgeable. One Saturday morning, while Sophie played in the park nearby, Abby and Noah sat on a bench under a budding tree. The sun warmed their shoulders and filled the silence between them with something tender. Abby turned to him with a look that was part amusement, part disbelief. "I used to think if I ever saw you again, it would be awkward. Angry, even. But now it just feels normal. Like this is what it was always supposed to be." Noah nodded, his eyes on Sophie as she chased after a butterfly with wild, uncoordinated leaps. "I thought I had everything I needed before," he said. "But now I can't imagine any of it without her, or without you." Abby smiled, not with hesitation this time, but with quiet warmth. "You didn't just show up for Sophie," she said. "You showed up for me, too. And I didn't realize how much I needed that until you did." That evening, they had dinner at Noah's apartment, his place, now transformed. The cold minimalism was gone, replaced with shelves filled with books and toys, throw blankets, a small table Sophie had painted with stars and scribbles, and a fridge covered in drawings. After dinner, Sophie disappeared into her room and returned wearing a fancy dress and a paper crown, declaring that tonight was family night. She had made decorations from construction paper and tape, and insisted they all sit on the floor with cookies and music. As they sat under a string of fairy lights Sophie had helped hang earlier that week, Noah watched Abby laugh, really laugh, for the first time in years. Her head tilted back, her eyes full of light. Sophie curled up in his lap, tired from too much dancing and sugar, and mumbled that this had been the best day of her whole life. Noah looked across at Abby, who was watching them with the kind of expression that said everything words never could. He reached for her hand, and she didn't hesitate. Their fingers intertwined naturally. Later, after Sophie had gone to bed, Noah walked Abby to the door as he always did when she stayed late. But this time, she didn't reach for her coat. She stood quietly, watching him, then said, "I don't think I want to keep going back and forth. I think it's time we live like we belong to each other. Not just on weekends. Every day." He stepped closer, brushing a curl from her cheek. "You mean it?" She nodded. "We already are a family, Noah. Let's stop pretending it's temporary." They moved in together 2 weeks later. It wasn't dramatic or rushed, it was natural, inevitable, a home that grew from the inside out. Sophie helped pick the curtains. Abby organized the kitchen her way. Noah gave up his office to turn it into Sophie's art room. And life became something fuller than any of them had ever imagined. On a warm evening in early summer, the three of them sat on a picnic blanket by the lake. Sophie was drawing in her notebook, telling a long story about a superhero who fixed broken bikes with a single touch. Abby leaned her head on Noah's shoulder, and he kissed her forehead. "You know," he said, "I used to think success was about control, about having everything planned. But I've never felt more alive than I do when I have no idea what tomorrow looks like with you two." Abby smiled, her voice soft. "That's because for the first time, you're not running from anything. You're running toward it." And in that moment, with the sound of Sophie's laughter drifting on the breeze and the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold, Noah realized he hadn't just found love or redemption, he had found home. What makes the ending of this story so powerful is its quiet, earned transformation. It doesn't rely on dramatic revelations or sudden changes of heart, it shows growth through consistent presence, vulnerability, and the courage to repair what was once abandoned. Noah's journey from a distant, self-contained executive to a fully present father and partner feels not only believable, but deeply moving. He doesn't redeem himself through money or grand gestures, but through showing up every day, even when it's hard, even when trust takes time. The story reminds us that love isn't always loud, it's often built in quiet spaces, in packed lunches, bedtime stories, and slow forgiveness. That's what makes the ending feel so complete, not because everything is perfect, but because they chose each other, day after day.